Hello, and welcome to this very special History Chats. What makes it special? It's not live. So because of the holidays in the end of December here, Gary and I decided to take the Christmas Eve and New Year's Eve off. But instead, we did decide to pre-tape this one on the history of Santa Claus and his public appearances in Marathon County. So we're going to get it in a second. Again, thank you for joining us. Just so you know, I'm going to basically get rid of the camera right now because I'm doing something a little different than our normal streaming setup. It's just going to be easier if I don't have the camera on. So let's talk about Santa Claus, shall we? So presumably, he had been coming here to deliver gifts to the good little boys and girls of Marathon County for, well, as long as there were boys and girls living in Marathon County, probably in the 1840s, 50s. But that's Santa on the clock. He's working. So he didn't really have a whole lot of time to stick around and say, hey, how's it going, to his friends and acquaintances here in central Wisconsin. Instead, he's got a lot of houses to deliver to. And that was the line of thinking that led the Wausau Merchants Association to invite Santa Claus to come to the area in 1929. The press release read, quote, "This year, Santa Claus finished his toy making a little early so that he would have some time to take pre-Christmas visits. When the retail division of the Wausau Merchants Association invited Santa Claus to come to Wausau on December 3rd, St. Nicholas accepted the invitation at once and sent a flying Eskimo to answer the message," unquote. Now, quick aside, the inclusion of the Eskimos is kind of a strange one. I think today we would expect that to read something along the lines of elves, but at this point in 1929, the mythos of Santa Claus, the lore, the canon of the Santa Claus had not really been established by countless, holiday films and TV shows and specials on television and things like that. Instead, maybe the Eskimos were a thing. I don't know if this was something that was more widespread or if this was specific to this copywriter, but there you are. Anyway, getting back to the visit of Santa Claus on December 3rd, 1929, he came. And he ended up having a little parade from noon until 1 along the streets of Wausau, which was timed to coincide with the recess from the local school children. And then after the opportunity for these kids to get a break and see him and pet his reindeer, Santa Claus went and visited the local hospitals and a couple houses where sick children were unable to join them for the festivities earlier were able to give a chance to see him. And then at 7 o'clock, he made another final appearance at the Central School Auditorium, where he was there for any parents who wanted to bring their children there as well. And overall, it was a pretty big hit. People enjoyed seeing Santa Claus, and what was pretty novel. Again, technically there had been mall Santas or department store Santas as well as, decades earlier, but this was a first here in central Wisconsin. Or was it? Because actually the day before this, Santa went to Marshfield. Because a few weeks before Wausau announced that it would be hosting Santa Claus on December 3rd, the papers in Marshfield were asking kids to write in to include their name on a proposal to get Santa Claus to come to Marshfield. This is the radiogram that they apparently sent to Santa Claus on behalf of the Commercial Club of Marshfield, but with a lot of names of children across Marshfield. And in fact, there was a whole second page full of names not only from Marshfield, but from other communities across the region, including many from Marathon County. Cities like Unity, Colby, Spencer, and Abbotsford all added their names to the Marshfield appeal. And of course, Santa agreed to make the visit. And then over the course of the next few weeks in the lead up to Santa's visit in Marshfield on December 2nd, the local papers were publishing missives from Santa himself, some of which were saying, "Hey, I left the North Pole, I'm on my way." Some of them said, "Hey, we just arrived in Alaska, we're on our way." In other cases, they were informational. They were intended to say, "Hey, here's what a Yule log is," or Yuletide trees, things like that. And ultimately, this helped to build the excitement. And interestingly enough, a similar thing happened on maybe a smaller scale in the Wausau papers as well. They didn't necessarily have a daily update, but they did publish one or two updates as well. And Santa was said to have taken in a completely different route. In Wausau, they talked about how he was flying over the Canadian wilderness, whereas in the Marshfield paper, he seemed to be taking the route from the North Pole to Alaska, and then down the Pacific Northwest from Seattle through the United States eastward to Wisconsin. But still, there's enough similarities between the two stories that make us think that there was probably a connection, even though the Marshfield and Wausau papers never acknowledged the existence of Santa visiting the other city. They both seem to have a lot of indicators, such as the number of reindeer that were supposedly coming with them, which actually were not as much as promised. Both of them had to report, unfortunately, some of the reindeer died on the trip. And that, combined with the uniqueness of the Eskimo talk and things like that, make me think that there was some sort of similarity. Maybe it was one Santa Claus who made the trip and managed to hit Wausau and Marshfield and perhaps other cities in Wisconsin in the early week of December as well. At any rate, the arrival of Santa Claus in Wausau in 1929 was a big hit. And the next year came around and they decided, yeah, we're going to do that again. This time, it was not be for a single afternoon, but he would be here for a protracted period of time. And so, to make him feel at home, the people of Wausau built a cheery ice palace. The idea here being that Santa Claus, as he was familiar with the environment of the North Pole, which is cold, would be, uncomfortable living in a warm hotel room. And so they decided to make an ice house for him, and this is how that looked. It's certainly a very elaborate result, and they didn't spare very much expense in making it really interesting, including adding electrified lines. You can see the light bulbs hanging on the inside, because this would have been lit up. So at night, the electric lights would have provided a nice luminescence as they bled through the glass blocks and just illuminated the whole thing. Now, in 1931 and 32, they did this again to coincide with Santa's visit. But the materials weren't particularly strong, and it wasn't quite, it was very popular, but it was not necessarily financially viable to continue to invest in this. And so in 1933, they were brought back in 1934 after public pressure, but it just really wasn't working, especially as this was the depths of the Great Depression. This sort of expense was maybe not as helpful. And so this evolved into other forms. Because, of course, they had to keep evolving it, changing it. So in 1936 and 37, they started to bring in other acts like Cinderella. So it's not just Santa Claus, he's bringing his friends, characters from Mother Goose and other fairy tales. I think the Easter Bunny may have made an appearance at one point. And this again helped to enliven the experience by providing something new and different. And in 1937, in addition to bringing in some of his friends from Mother Goose, they added a new wrinkle, which was having Santa Claus arrive by airplane. He would arrive at Alexander Airport, and then he would get on a float that would take him on the parade route across Wausau. And actually, this particular instance gives a pretty good indication of the route. So this is the route that Santa would have taken in 1939. Up from Grand Avenue after getting on the airport, and then they kind of zigzagged around downtown Wausau for a bit before heading over the bridge, and then kind of hitting some neighborhoods down here, and then back up to the north side, cross across Bridge Street once again, hit the north side, and that was that. It's kind of interesting to see that's a pretty long parade, but you got to hit all the kids in all of the areas as best you can. But it's particularly the fact that they used the airplanes, which was really interesting, because I think there was an attempt, again, to try to make it interesting for spectators. And what is more interesting than this new thing? Airplanes. And of course, we're very proud of our new Alexander Airport that was recently built. And so what better way to celebrate these two things coming together than having Santa arrive by airplane? This particular picture series, by the way, I think is from the 40s. So this is not quite accurate to the 1930s. This would be something that they would do for quite some time. In fact, up until I think the 1980s, I think they brought it back. I wouldn't say that it happened every single year. They kind of changed it. As you can see, this process helps with some experimentation because you want to bring in something new and try to get people to come out to see Santa Claus. And, if it's the same thing as last year, maybe it's not as interesting. But hey, if he's coming by airplane or he's got Cinderella or that sort of thing. But yeah, it became, this new wrinkle of having the airplane bring him here allowed for people to come and, wait for him at the airport. So instead of just waiting at a parade route, you could go and greet him and see him arrive, which you couldn't necessarily do from the earlier years in which he arrived by sleigh. Whether that would be a sleigh that was pulled by flying reindeer or just the normal kind, either way, people didn't see that. And so now we have a new way to do this. Now, it's interesting, too, because the parade routes during these years in the late, 30s, 40s, often led to a place like this, which would have been, I believe, the WPS building or perhaps City Hall or the Federal building or something like that in a basement someplace, where, again, you could come and bring your kids and see Santa Claus. But the interesting wrinkle here is that the radio starts to play another role. Again, you can see the idea of bringing in modern technology to reach new audiences and keep it interesting. So you could come and there's sort of an interesting wrinkle here, again, a development in which previously newspapers like the Wausau Daily Herald would have published the letters of children writing to Santa Claus. Without going too much into detail about this, basically in the 1800s when the practice started, there really wasn't a valid way that you could send a letter to Santa Claus. The U.S. Postal Service didn't really have a zip code for the North Pole, and people would write, kids would write whatever they thought was, appropriate, Candyland, North Pole, or, something like that. And so these letters were not being delivered. And rather than have hundreds and perhaps thousands of letters delivered back to sender or worse, being destroyed, organizations and publications like the Wausau Daily Herald stepped up to say, hey, Santa is an avid reader of our newspaper. And if you want to make sure that your letter will get to him this Christmas in time for him to find out what you want for Christmas, well, then why don't you just send it to us and we will publish it in our newspaper. And this was kind of a fun thing. They had for many years lists, just here's all of these letters to Santa Claus from the 19-teens and 20s. But by the end of the 20s, it becomes so popular that the Herald and other newspapers across central Wisconsin that were doing the same found themselves in an unfortunate situation where they were having to dedicate columns after columns to these letters. And so, after 1929, coincidentally, they started to just print the list of the names of the kids who delivered them to Santa. And they said, yes, we'll continue to forward them along. We'll just make sure he gets your letter. But it wasn't quite the same not seeing your full letter in print, and so that kind of declines. Whereas the radio becomes a common place for you to see the letters take their place. The local radio station would read out letters to Santa Claus, or have, as you see in these pictures, local kids come and have it done live. So you can see another sort of variation on the theme here. But whether the Santa, whether Mrs. Claus or Cinderella or the Easter Bunny was there with him, whether they were arriving at the airport or, making their way in other ways, this became a staple of the holiday tradition in the mid-20th century in Wausau. What's interesting, too, is a connection here, and one of the reasons that it maybe became not quite as popular in the long run is that Santa Claus was a novel thing in 1929, 30, 31. There's not a lot of other opportunities to see Santa Claus. But the association with department stores, because after all, it was the Wausau Merchants Association that arranged to bring Santa Claus to Wausau. That was not by happenstance. They weren't just doing it out of the kindness of their hearts and wanting to see the kids get to see Santa Claus. I'm sure that played a part. But they also wanted to kind of hype up coming to downtown Wausau. You see that parade route spent a lot of time around the shops and stores in downtown Wausau. That was an intention. They wanted to get people to come in and buy your Christmas gifts while you're here. And so places like department stores, like the Fair Store here, this is 1929. This is saying, hey, by the way, come see Santa in 1929. at the bottom of an ad for JCPenney's Twilight in Toyland. So there's a lot of connections that you can see here. And, it becomes commonplace for department stores, and, eventually we get the mall, and becomes a thing where generations of kids get an opportunity to sit on Santa's lap, get their picture taken, and tell them what we want for Christmas, in these locations. And in some ways, the proliferation of Santa Claus in public media, in different locations, maybe makes it less special to see, come to the parade to see him arrive. But, even the holiday parades these days, our downtown Wausau often feature Santa Claus to bring things to an end. And that tradition goes back all the way to 1929 and that first visit to Wausau from Santa Claus. Well, there you go. There's a little history of Santa Claus and Marathon County in the sort of public appearances of Santa Claus. Tried to hit as much as I could. If you have stories, by the way, of going to see Santa Claus or taking siblings or your own children, grandchildren, whatever, to see Santa Claus at the airport or at the mall or department stores, any place like that, or more, we'd love to have you share them here. It'd be kind of fun to get some different perspectives on what you've experienced. So if you want to do that, that'd be wonderful. Again, thank you so much for watching. This is not live. Normally they would be, but we were pre-taping it this week. But we will be back in the future in 2021. We have some interesting stuff cooking up. Gary Gisselman and I have kind of a short list of topics for the new year. We're going to be starting in January with winter sports. So we're going to be talking about curling. We're going to be talking about ski jumping and hockey and snowmobile racing. So that should be a lot of fun. Again, if you'd like to join us for those live, they're at 12:30 in the afternoon, so at midday on every Thursday. And if you can't join us live, there's always the recordings after the fact that we put up. So again, thank you for watching. Hope you all have a wonderful holidays and a happy new year. And we'll see you again in 2021.